Welcome back. Today, we're diving into a source that tackles a really big question, one that's been sparking debates for almost 200 years. Are Latter-day Saints Christian? Now, the source argues the answer isn't a simple yes or no. In fact, it kind of forces us to back up and ask a much bigger question. What does the word Christian even mean?
So, right out of the gate, the source hits us with the central question. Are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints actually Christian? It's a pretty provocative way to start, and as we're about to see, the whole answer really hangs on a major disagreement about the very identity of the faith itself. So, according to this source, it's not a simple yes or no, not at all. It claims the answer completely depends on which definition of Christian you're using, and it lays out two totally different options that are really at the heart of this whole conflict.
All right, so this brings us to our first big idea, a question of identity. Let's really break down the two competing definitions that create this divide in the first place.
Okay, so here they are, side by side. On one hand, you've got this really broad definition. A Christian is just someone who follows Jesus Christ and believes he's the Savior. Simple enough. But then, on the other hand, you have this much stricter, more historical definition. To be a real Christian, you have to accept specific creeds, things like the doctrine of the Trinity, that were hammered out in councils hundreds of years after Christ's life. The source says this right here is the fundamental fork in the road.
So how on earth did we end up with these two completely different ideas of Christianity? Well, the source actually maps this whole divergence out on a historical timeline. This timeline really illustrates the source's main argument. It all starts with the first century church, which it says was led by living apostles and got direct revelation from God. Then you get this huge shift in 325 AD with the Council of Nicaea. That's when creedal Christianity starts to take shape. Fast forward to the Reformation, the Reformers challenged a lot, but crucially, the source points out they kept those post-biblical creeds. And finally, the source positions the Restoration in 1830 as a full-circle attempt to get back to that original model. And this table just lays out the core differences so clearly. According to the source's view, the original church saw the Godhead as three separate beings, united. Authority came from living prophets, and the idea was that the book wasn't sealed. God could still speak. In stark contrast, creedal Christianity defines the Godhead as a trinity, bases its authority on historical councils, and considers the Bible a closed, finished book. Okay, now the source takes a pretty sharp turn and puts a huge cornerstone of Protestantism right under the microscope. The whole idea of sola scriptura, or Bible alone. And this is where it gets really interesting. The source points out this massive irony. The only place in the entire Bible where you find the exact phrase faith only is, wait for it, right here in the book of James. And what does it say? That a person is justified by works and not by faith only. I mean, that's a direct contradiction to that core doctrine. So, building on that point, the source lays out this three-step critique. First, it claims the doctrine of Bible alone is not actually taught anywhere in the Bible. Second, it highlights that Martin Luther himself admitted to adding the word alone to a verse in his German translation to make it fit his theology. And third, and this is a big one, it argues that the result of this doctrine has been an explosion of over 45,000 different denominations, all claiming to follow the same book, but none of them agreeing on what it means. Okay, so after breaking down those creedal and Reformation ideas, the source completely switches gears. Now it starts building its own case for what it calls the Restoration, and it does that by pointing to all kinds of evidence that it says backs up the claims of the Book of Mormon. The source then presents a whole array of external evidence it says supports the Book of Mormon's claims, ranging from archaeology in the Americas all the way to testable geography in the Old World. Let's just zoom in on one specific example to see how this argument works. The source brings up this one place mentioned in the Book of Mormon, a place called Naham. And this is presented as a totally testable claim, right? It's a specific name in a specific part of the world that should, in theory, actually exist. And here's the finding the source highlights. Decades later, in the 1990s, archaeologists in Yemen actually found these ancient altars. And guess what was inscribed on them? The letters NHM. You know, exactly where and when the Book of Mormon narrative said this place called Nahom should be. But it's really important to point out that the source itself tries to present the other side of the coin too. For example, when it talks about Mesoamerican archaeology, it presents the supporting view that new tech like LiDAR is revealing these huge ancient cities that seem to fit the descriptions. But it
also includes the critical view that nobody has ever found a single inscription or artifact that says, hey, the Nephites were here. And that brings us to our final and maybe the most important section. The source brings everything full circle and boils the entire argument down to one single powerful question. So after walking us through all this history and all this evidence, the source basically poses a final, pointed question. Based on this framework, which version of Christianity is the one that has actually moved away from the original blueprint? And from this source's perspective, the answer is that the conflict was never really about the Trinity or faith alone. It argues the fundamental disagreement is all about authority. Is Christian truth defined by historical councils and man-made traditions, or is it defined by living prophets receiving ongoing revelation directly from God? And the source leaves us with this final, thought-provoking question, drawn right from its text. It asks, if God always revealed truth through prophets, why would he suddenly stop? And that reframes the whole thing, doesn't it? It frames the core difference not as a matter of interpretation, but as a fundamental question about God's communication with humanity. And that's a powerful idea to think about.